All right, hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your boy, your favorite conservatarian contrarian, Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. Got another great conversation for you guys today. Got another great guest, and I think you guys are going to love this one. We're going to talk about a few things that are going on right now. But before we get into all of that, you know what to do. You know what to do. Like this video. Share this video, and if you haven't already subscribed, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button right now. You'll be glad that you did. Also, if you want to support my work, all of my links are in the show notes below. I've got the CashApp, the Venmo app, and all the other apps. Every little bit helps. I appreciate all of it. Also, remember that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective. Check out LibertyNation.com for all of your conservatarian news, original articles and analysis, videos, podcasts, Liberty Nation Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five, all on LibertyNation.com, where truth is making a comeback. Now then, without further ado, I want to bring on the executive director of Seeking Educational Excellence and the author of Race Crazy, Mr. Charles Love, a bona fide celebrity. He's been on Fox News a billion times too.
Bona fide celebrity.
Bona fide.
Well, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. I look forward to it.
Good. Me too. I've actually been wanting to talk to you for a while because you see that there's this disturbing trend of Black conservatives on Twitter being smartasses, and that's my role, and I don't appreciate it. And you are one of them. You, Adam B. Coleman, Delano Squires, you guys think you can just be funny on Twitter and be Black and conservative. No, that's my spot. I don't appreciate that.
I will stay out of your way. I just ask questions. Dude, I just ask questions. That's all I do. I just want to ask a question, right? That's all I do.
You know, when we first started following each other, you would do that. I'm like, is he serious or is he trolling me right now? And then I realized, okay, he's probably trolling. Okay, now I know. Now I get it.
I don't think I've gotten that thing right yet. So I'm not sure. I know I have an idea of what I think a troll is, but I think I'm totally wrong. I'll admit when I'm wrong because people say you're trolling. I'm like, I don't really think I'm trolling. I'm just asking because I think I read people's tweets as informational, sometimes sarcastic, but posing the other side. So when they post stuff, I just say, that could be true, but what about this? So I don't mean it. When I hear troll, it's kind of like I'm intentionally trying to mess with somebody or call them out. I'm not doing that. So I don't really think I'm a troll, but according to what I've been told, I'm a troll.
It is trollish behavior, which is unfortunate.
Okay, I'm troll-ish. Okay.
Yeah, troll-ish. You're troll adjacent. See, but sometimes I know that when you're trying to be funny though. So then I'm like, okay, all right, he's messing.
Right.
All right. Well, so before we get into everything, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
About myself, I was born a poor sharecropper in Mississippi.
They're trying to cancel Steve Martin, right? I mean.
I channeled the jerk. No, I was born and raised in Gary, Indiana. I'm looking at you because people usually react when I say that. But I call myself just the ordinary guy. I grew up working class, so it wasn't like your stereotypical in the projects kind of thing. But I didn't grow up with a lot of money either. Just regular guy.
Right.
And worked in restaurants for years. I usually don't talk about that because no one makes me tell my whole boring story. But yeah, I worked in restaurants and managed restaurants for about 20 years. So That was fun. You get to meet and see all walks of life and have conversations with different types of people. And kind of started writing and getting into, I say culture, people say politics, but the culture and education kind of, indirectly, I just saw things happening and I thought they were odd, like the way I replied to tweets. So I started asking a series of questions. It started with Obama's win, and it wasn't really a political agreement or disagreement with Obama. It was watching my friends react. And I'm like, what is this about? Because I never was really built that way. My parents weren't like that. So I'm one of, and I know I'm not the norm. So I'm not a hanger on. I'm not a joiner.
Right.
I don't wear brand name clothes because I don't like walking around with other people's name on my thing. So it's just me. So I never lived vicariously.
We're similar.
Right. So I never lived vicariously through other people. So I never said, like, I was a sports fan. I had teams I liked and I was happy when they won, but I never said we won, right? I never said we won the championship. So when I saw all this stuff, I was like, okay, that's odd, but I guess that's how people react. But then when the attacks started from Republicans and when the reaction started from Democrats, I would hear my friends who had never heard talk about politics before started all of a sudden overnight, they became these political analysts. And I was like, well, no president has ever been treated like this before. And I've never heard anyone say it. I'm like, do you all read? So I would ask them questions. I'm like, really? You know, like 8 presidents got shot, right? Right. That's pretty bad treatment, I would say, you know, and a number of them guys didn't, right? You know, Teddy and Reagan. But, you know, I started talking about that and they say, and so they started to speak in these sweeping generalizations. So I just started saying, well, what about this? So I wrote my first book, kind of like, you know, it's called Logic, the Truth About Blacks and Republican Parties. And it's talking about, so these are all the stereotypes you believe. And then here are all the things that debunk these stereotypes. Not telling you who to vote for. I just think it's odd that you're saying all Republicans are rich, or the Democrats love the poor, or only Republicans get us into war. I'm like, you know, here's some facts.
Yeah.
So then I started to talk about that. But then the bigger thing was when I started to notice the cultural change, which is why if you listen to me speak or read my writings, most of it is not really about politics because I don't think that's our true problem. And so you talked about the book that we're going to talk about later. Yes. But my second book, I think, is the magnum opus, the We Want Equality, how the fight for equality gave way to preference.
That's your latest book?
No, that's the second book. The Race Crazy is my most recent book.
Oh, okay, right. Okay.
But We Want Equality was more about where the culture was going. It came out in 18. I wrote it in 17. And it ended up being pretty prophetic. I wrote about where we were going to be, 2, 3, 4. Well, what I thought 10 to 15 years down the road, which became 5. But I said, if we keep going down this road, those people who were fighting just to be treated fairly, the sandwich board that says, I am a man, treat me with dignity the way you treat that guy. Those people are gone. And what's replaced them are people saying, this is what you owe me. I want preference. This is what I expect. Mm-hmm. And I saw that coming. And I said, if no one talks about it, we're going to get an overcorrection and it's going to get a lot worse than where people thought it was going to be. And people just like, why do you keep talking about that? And then here we are, and I'll shut up and let you talk.
No, I like that you use that word overcorrection because I've been trying to find a way to describe what I see. I'm seeing a lot of the same things, but it's like we're combating an evil that existed in America and still does exist to a certain extent. And we're like going full the opposite direction. And we're going to get to this in a second, but I've seen all these stories and I've been writing these stories or commenting on these stories about them introducing woke, what I call it woke segregation into classrooms where they're having events just for minorities. I'm like, do you not see what's happening here? So I don't want to put words in your mouth. Would you describe that as being part of the overcorrection? Is that kind of what you're talking about? That's
one of the many, we both know many examples, but it's kind of like I write about that in the most recent book where I say, which is why the subtitle is about progressive racism, right? It's like a kinder, gentler racism, right? It's the same premise as John Calhoun, right? But our intentions are different, which makes us better. So John Calhoun, who those of you who don't know, there was lots. We know slavery. We know a lot of people tried to defend it, and they used different factions. Right. But he's a great example because John Calhoun took a different route. He basically doubled down, saying, "You act like slavery is bad, right?" Whether you want to admit it or not, many slave owners said that we like to say our founders owned slaves, right? But those who did, most of them knew it was wrong. They wrote about it. It's like, we shouldn't have done this, but we've been doing this for years. How do we get away from it? Not Calhoun. Calhoun was proud and loud about the slavery. He knew that blacks were inferior, but he took a second step, though. This was his unique take. And because blacks are inferior, slavery is a net good, right? So these people couldn't survive without our nurturing. So we're doing them a service, right? And most of us would look at that today. Even racists today will look at that and say, okay, that's crazy.
That's a little too far.
Right. Well, progressive racists are the same way. Only difference is their intentions are different, right? Their intentions are to help blacks. They see an inequality and they want to correct it. That makes them better than Calhoun. But the way they address it is the same. They say these blacks are oppressed. All blacks are oppressed. All blacks are in poverty. All blacks are uneducated. All blacks are tied up in the criminal justice system. This is what blacks are. Same as Calhoun. They're inferior.
Yes.
So, but unlike Calhoun, we want to release them from those shackles and make their lives better. But in order to do that, we need to control how the fix happens. And we, being the superior white folk, we need to make it better for them because we want to help them. We care about them. So in order to help them, we need to create things specifically for them. And we need to dictate how it happens because they won't be able to do it on their own. How is that different than Calhoun?
It's not. Just the intention behind it is different. That's it.
Right.
And I've noticed that too. I mean, they want to control how the supposed change happens and how they're going to make things equitable. You know, and we talk a lot about like black progressives, and I'm like, yeah, those are an issue, but they're really working for the white progressives who think that they're actually doing something good.
Right. Think about every black progressive you believe, whether they're that, like, I will defend them on one case. A lot of people on Twitter call a lot of people grifters. And you know, that's one of the things I tweet about making fun of people because I'm like, most of these people aren't really grifters. Because when I think about it, go watch the movie Grifter, right? The grifter has a specific intent, right? He's trying to con you out of your money. So if I believe in conservatism or if I am a true believer in my leftist views and then you pay me to push what I truly believe, then I'm not a grifter. I'm just getting paid saying what I believe. I'm a grifter when I don't really believe it, right? So some of them are, like my person, I could be wrong. I don't know them personally. I don't think Nicole Hannah-Jones is a grifter. I think Kendi's a grifter. That's my belief.
Really?
That's my belief.
So you don't think he believes what he's saying? Because I see.
No.
Really?
No, he doesn't believe. He. I will not disrespect Kenny to say he's dumb enough to believe the stuff he believes. It's disrespectful for any of us to believe that man is dumb enough to believe the stuff he said. No, I don't believe it. He's a grifter and he's good at it. But what I'm saying is, though, what's important to note here, though, is though many of them aren't grifters, go to what you said about where the money comes from. So Nicole Hannah-Jones is very successful. She can do a lot of things on her own right now, but the reason we know her name is because wealthy white progressives. But for New York Times Magazine and Pulitzer, none of us know whether we agree with her or not. Is beside the point. No one knows who she is at that point. So you cannot say that this stuff is being driven by, at its genesis, Nicole Hannah-Jones. It's not.
No, it's
right?
not.
So, and the fact that, you know, I have serious problems with nothing else BLM and 1619 Project, but to be fair, the fact that we are going to pretend that what you say, there's still racism, of course there is, but to say that white supremacy, racism, all that stuff is the sole thing that's holding all black people back. Right. At the same time, that the only reason these people we're mentioning, Kendi, her, are famous and have their platform and money is because some white person, whether progressive or conservative, doesn't matter. The only reason they have this strong voice and this deep reach is because of these very white people who are oppressing us. Why would these white oppressors allow her to go out there and create a platform that's putting them down? I just want people to logically ask the question. So I'm white. White is bad. Don't like blacks. And I'm going to give this woman a platform and millions of dollars and push out a book that basically says whites are evil and America is built on anti-black racism.
That's a very good question.
Just answer me why. No one can tell me why. They can say whether they agree with it or not. That's a separate issue. I will answer your question, but you have to answer mine first. Why would I, as the white racist, support this? Even if I believe it, I'll be like, yeah, but I don't want to support it. I want to continue in my comfortable life, not having people know that I'm a racist.
What about, so the answer that comes to my mind is white guilt. Like, you know, a lot of these people play on white guilt, whether it's black progressives or white progressives. They play on this notion that your ancestors may have owned slaves or at least supported slavery or benefited from slavery. You benefit from slavery. You know, you benefit from systemic racism. Therefore, your white guilt allows me to motivate you to do what I want, or allows me to manipulate you into pushing my agenda.
Right.
That's
well,
what
to that. I agree with that. But white guilt, one, is like Kendi. Do they all really believe that though? Or it's like the corporations. Most of us don't believe the corporations are really all that woke, some of them. But think about it. A corporation has a board, and then they have upper executive management, and then they have middle management, right? So for a large corporation, you're talking about 400 people. How can all of them be woke? Stop it. They're not woke. Most of them are basically, you remember, I compared to Barbershop. You remember when Cedric the Entertainer's character, when the riots happened, and he flashed back to when he stood out and people were painting black owned outside their businesses because they, don't riot, don't burn down my business. I'm one of you, right? That's what Disney and Nike are doing. They're saying, look, if I give you a little money and I say I agree with your cause, will you not burn down my virtual business? Will you not boycott?
Protection money.
That's what part of it is. But the second thing is white guilt is just another layer on the onion on the Calhoun onion, right? Your white guilt is hurting my black kid, which we can get to that when we get to education. But regardless of your intent, I'm about solutions. So even if you're right, because my argument is always to give them their argument, because I call them emotionally weak and intellectually lazy surface thinkers, and they don't think things through. So just give them their argument. Whites are bad. Country's built on racism. Check. Not even a debate. I agree with you.
Okay.
So now white man's going to come to me with his white guilt saying my ancestors were horrible people, so I need to fix what they did. I don't even know how you're going to fix it, but okay. Yeah. So what you're going to do is you're going to tell me and my kids and the next generation that they are oppressed, but it's my fault. It's not your fault you're oppressed. Blacks are oppressed. It's me and other white people's fault, and we want to fix it, so we want to do these things. The problem with that is you're not thinking through the implications of what you're doing. So if you tell black kids who are now, it's like crime and guns and video games and rap music, right? I don't think those things cause all these problems. We can have those kind of debates. I've seen you talk about that. Other people talk about that. And I agree with that. But it is an accelerant, right? So if you add it to the right circumstances, poof, you create a fire. So you say that to you or me, it might not have an effect. We just, mock you on Twitter. But if you say it to the supposed kids you're talking about in fourth grade who aren't reading that and doing math at grade level, who are already struggling, and then instead of tutoring them or giving them the opportunities and the mentorship and the tools they need to do better and to catch up, but you say that the system's out to get you. The white man's out to get you. But we still see white men because you haven't gotten rid of them. What does that do for the psyche? What does it do for their mindset? It either gives them a thought of defeatism and saying, well, I can't do it because of this, or you make them angry. How is that helping? So even if you're right, and even if your intentions are great, you are creating a negative situation, which is making it harder for them to get out of this abyss you claim they're all in, even though we're not all in the abyss. So. Right. So it doesn't even help, even if you're trying to. So the white guilt does nothing for a black person. Nothing. Your white guilt is only for you. The last thing is also selfish. Your white guilt is for you. You're doing it to make yourself feel better. You're not doing it for me. You're not doing it for me. So, to hell with their white guilt is what I say. Keep it. And you and I both know, regardless of politics, which is why I don't talk about politics, the average black person, especially 30 to 50, hates the white liberals and their white guilt. They may not vote for the Republicans, they may know whatever, but the white guilt, they can see through it, like a thin veil. They're like, come on, I'm not buying that. Because in their logical mind, nobody would just openly put themselves down for one. And if they really believed they were so guilty they needed to correct it, they would start giving us stuff, not giving us back our own tax dollars. They would be like BLM was saying, give us the keys to your house. Give me your car. They would be giving up something that really means something, because saying words and tweeting stuff and changing your image on Twitter and Facebook is easy. Saying you're an ally is easy. When you give up stuff that matters, it becomes harder, and it's why they don't do it.
Yeah, you're right. And you're right. I do think that the average black person does see through that. Because sometimes I see the stuff that these white progressives say. I'm like, have you ever even talked to a black person? I'll say stuff about white conservatives. I criticize the right a lot. But the same thing holds true for white progressives. It's like, remember when after the George Floyd popped off, you had like these white progressives trying to like wash black people's feet, or like a Marianne Williamson held this service where white people were supposed to apologize to black people. I'm like, you do realize that the average black dude thinks that's weird, right? Like, you do understand that that's going to make us uncomfortable and make us like, get the hell away from me with that. Like,
now the foot thing was weird, but mine was the one I wrote that I picked out in the book was, do you remember I forgot what the phrase was called, but it's these actors in this somber tone, Deborah Messing and Julianne Moore and all your liberals talking about all. I forgot what the phrase. It was like, I apologize or I see you or something. But then they would say these comments afterwards, and Julianne Moore was like, black people are dying in the streets and being killed in their homes,
and it have
they don't have food, and they don't know how to read. I'm like, every black person I know, regardless age, high school age, senior citizens, left, Republic, everyone I know thought that was offensive. They were like, what is wrong with those people?
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely absurd. And it's like, like, especially in the film industry, they're talking about, oh, we need more opportunities for black and brown people and whatever. I'm like, okay, but you're still in that position. Why don't you give up your position and give it to a black person? It goes back to what you said. They'll switch their avatars on Twitter, but when it comes to the actual action, and I'm not saying they should do this, but I'm just saying if they actually believed what they believed, this is what they would do. And honestly, nobody wants them to do it. I like Family Guy and the character Cleveland. The guy that did his voice for years was a white dude. This dude comes out and says, I'm going to stop doing his voice because I'm a white man doing a black man's voice, and that should be a black actor. I'm like, no, what is wrong with you?
That's what made it funny. A black guy being funny, being Cleveland wouldn't be as funny.
It wouldn't be funny.
That's what made it funny. And he's like, remember Hank Azaria did the same thing. He retired the Indian voice on The Simpsons.
It's absolute. It feels. You're right. It is offensive. It feels insulting. Like, this is what's going to make things better for black people. Like, this is what's on top of our minds. The white guy isn't going to do Cleveland's voice anymore. That really affects my life.
Because it creates one job, first of all. But you know what? To their credit, I like to be fair. I would give them, even though that's kind of pandering, that still makes more sense than the other things they do. My problem, because you mentioned opportunity, I want to say this real quick. And I'm all about giving more, creating more opportunities, and that thing is great. And if that's your intent, way to go. Mm-hmm. The problem is twofold. Both if the creating the opportunities here, here's the problem, and we're all punching this as hard as we can. Won't do anything. Mm-hmm. So take the Oscars. We need more blacks to win Oscars. First of all, why do you need more black? Whoever wins an award, whatever. But you need them to have more opportunities. Okay. But we focus on the awards. But, I'm a numbers guy, and I'm like, but the awards are based on the opportunities, which are based on the number of movies that are made. And if you're making 50,000 movies a year and 49,900 of them are made by whites, then of course the majority of the directors in the movies are going to be white, because we have 1% of all the movies that are made by minorities, right? So you need more people to make the movies, not just we're just going to force blacks into the roles. Like if you need to have more people in the acting roles, or everybody off camera must be black, a percentage, that's silly. But the other opportunity is below. So it sounds like, Charles, you're saying the solution is to have more movies made by blacks. But how are they going to make movies if they don't have the money and they don't have the experience producing movies? Correct. But in many of these cases, they don't do enough on the ground level to solve these problems. It goes back to education. You need the skill set and to know how to do these things. So I am a government consultant. So a lot of what I do is for people that have technical jobs, right? So like after George Floyd, all these companies and everybody said we wanted more black, let's say engineers. And I'm like, I am all for creating more black engineers. The problem is you as an engineering firm will say, we're going to hire more blacks. Where are you going to get them from? Because this is one of the questions I ask all the people who want to help, left, right, and center. Think of every black person you know, okay? Now think of all the ones that have letters behind their names. You know, the PEs, the MBAs, the MDs, and through all the other black societies. So you got them all in your head? They say yes. I said, now, how many of them are unemployed? I've been asking this question for 4 years, and I'm still at 0. So they all have jobs. So if you and I are a white guy and we own an engineering firm, we're like, George Floyd died. We're going to help blacks become engineers. And so we go out and we actively recruit black engineers. That sounds cool. And to people who don't understand engineering, it sounds like a great thing. But all we're doing is stealing employed engineers from other companies because there are no unemployed black engineers. Right? So what you need to do is catch kids while they're young, get them interested in engineering, and then catch them in junior high school, catch the ones that are just below grade level and at grade level, get them up to grade level and mentor them through, and then help them get through high school, college, whatever. That's what you do. You need to create the ground game, right? But what they do is they start at college. It's too late. You've already made what the engineers you're going to make, and those guys are going to be fine.
So they don't need to get more black engineers. They need to raise more black engineers is what it sounds like.
Exactly. But that means they need to raise. What do you need to? What kind of skill sets do you need for engineering? That means you need to create people who understand and can do math at grade level. Mm-hmm. But what you want to do is teach them about Harriet Tubman. Yeah, you know, because that's going to make more engineers. So you're not even solving the problem. If the problem is an opportunity problem, how do we get into a debate on history?
Right.
I don't even understand that. It makes no sense. So if we're really trying to solve the problem, we're not going about it the right way. Racism exists. Racism is still going to exist. Yep. But if the goal is to decrease gaps in education, economic gaps, all these gaps, we agree that there are no unemployed blacks with letters behind their name, or very few. And we agree that most of them are not only employed, but they are definitely gainfully employed. They're doing quite well.
Yeah, they're doing well.
They may still be dealing with racism, but they can better deal with it when they have money in their pocket. So why don't we focus on creating more blacks with letters after their name? And then once we get a high percentage of those, then we go back and focus on, let's teach better history. Let's teach about white racism. That's cool.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. That's always been my problem with the progressive side. It's like they want to wait for white people to stop being racist, and then we'll be able to come up. Well, no, I mean that's not what Malcolm X was talking about. Like he was talking about, you know, there's a racism there. Yeah, we get it, but we can still overcome it. If you got money in the bank, and like you said, you got those letters behind your name, then that racism will be there, but you can handle it a lot better. Instead of waiting for the racism to just magically go away, because it's never going to go away, focus on uplifting black people in a way that the racism doesn't harm them as much or at all.
Right. And can I say something that's unpopular about the racism that's there?
Yeah.
I like the racism that's there, and I want it to come back. I miss the racism that's there. Let me tell you why. Because I focus on human nature, and I know it's not going anywhere anyway. So since it's not going anywhere, I liked it when I could see it. I don't mean 1960s separate water fountain, but I mean like when somebody would look at me and be like, I don't think you should be around here. I like to know that. But now the guy is just as racist as he was 4 years ago, but now he's been trained to hide it, right? So now all you did is like creating a better criminal. It's like the problem with the criminal justice system is more the system, not the police. See, we can get into that. I got a problem with fixing criminal justice, not because I don't think it's not broken, not because I don't think it should be that we can fix it or we should focus on fixing it, but everybody's focused on the police when the problem is the system, right? The problem is how long you put in jail, putting people in jail before you give them the speedy trial our Constitution says that they're supposed to get, and then what you put them in. Instead of these kids having trades or being prepped for college, we don't do that well, but we do a great job of creating criminals in jail, right? Because they put them in jail and they learn all this other stuff. So it's the same thing with the racist. The racist used to just be a racist, blurt out racist crap. And we were like, oh,
like you knew who you were
now
doing.
We've trained him in the lingo on how to not say the things he normally say. So if he's successful and wealthy, which is a fallacy, I don't like the fact that we assume, when we talk about hiring practice, because we're assuming that, okay, not every white person is racist, but somehow all of the racists are smart enough to go through college and become millionaires and billionaires. So they control all the industries. No white leftists, just the white racists on the right control all the industries, right? Because some of them have to not be racist. But okay. So now that guy can go and hide in his corporate world at his country club, and he keeps his racist comments to a tight circle now because you've trained it out of him. And I used to be able to catch him and notice it, and I can call him out and maybe sue him if he breaks the law, or I can get some gains, at least in the corporate side, because he'll slip up. But now his game is tight because you beat it out of him. So you didn't make him not a racist. You just made him better at being a hidden racist.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I want to go more into that, especially when it concerns education. But before we go forward, just remember, I want to remind you guys to head on over to libertynation.com after you're done watching this awesome interview. Proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective. You can get all the latest cutting edge conservative news and analysis with none of the spin and all of the nuance. And you know me, I love the nuance. I don't like to stay at the superficial level. I want to go deep, and that's what Liberty Nation does. It's not just my content. All of the writers at libertynation.com are going to give you well thought out analyses of the issues of the day. So check out libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback. Now, I wanted to ask you, Charles, I didn't know you had an organization. What is Seeking Educational Excellence?
Well, Seeking Educational Excellence is, I guess it was kind of, I like to say it's kind of like a victim of the woke culture, because it was founded to address the very thing, to make a difference, right? To be solutions based on the issues we're facing. So like the engineer analysis I said. Let's let other people, there's organizations out there focus on racism, focus on, all these other feelings and cultural stuff. Do what you do. We want to focus on solutions. So how do we get more kids, particularly those who are struggling, whose families are struggling financially, things of that nature, get more of them to the plateau of the lettered professionals, the engineers, things of that nature, and academic and economic success. So STEM focus. So we wanted to focus on STEM instead of the social justice stuff. Not to tell people not to do it if that's what they want to do, but we're going to say, okay, take these kids, go into the inner city and say, okay, you have students that aren't at grade level. What can we do to pull the research sources in the community to get them to grade level? Is it mentorship? Is it taking them out of their environment? I mean, you think about it this way. People say opportunity, and they want to blame it on racism, and some of it is. But unfortunately, it's not nearly the bigger part. The bigger part is we make fun of, or we feel sorry for kids who want to be rappers and basketball players. Mm-hmm. But really, let's be real. What they really want to be is successful, and that's what they see successful people are, right?
Right.
How many, and it's not even just poor kids or black kids, it's in general because they don't know it. But think about it. Take the average 12-year-old, right? Or if you go younger, 6, 7, 8-year-old, they're still like fireman, policeman because they see them. But like 12, you say, what do you want to be when you're 12? Some will say doctor, but they just know that as a real, people brag about being doctors. So doctors good. How many of them want to be actuaries? How many of them want to be engineers? How many of them want to own a company and be their own boss and be an entrepreneur, but to be a licensed electrician?
Not many.
How much does licensed electricians make? Right? So there's plenty of jobs that'll pay you way, let's fight for 15, that'll pay you way over $100,000 a year. You don't even know those jobs exist. So maybe you need to take the kids out of the environment and have them, chef. Here's one. How many of them want to be an executive chef? Remember, I worked in restaurants for a year. I made far more than minimum wage when I managed restaurants. Right? If it's a big enough corporate chain, the GM gets a company car.
Oh, wow. You
write the schedule. So you get Sundays. You're like, restaurants, I don't want to work on the weekends. You write the schedule. You get Sundays off because you're the GM. Most companies, I mean, at least medium-sized restaurants, corporate chains, your Applebee's, Chili's, Fridays, most GMs make $100,000 a year. Wow. They write their own schedule. They make $100,000 a year, whatever. So, and that's not even counting fine dining. We get in fine dining, they make way more money. But nobody wants to do those jobs because they don't really know. They think restaurant. They think, I went to college right? And I was majoring in computer science and in finance. And then I started working in restaurants, and I started doing restaurants. And my friends used to, I remember it was so funny. He used to like pity me, like, poor Charles, he was so good in school. I don't understand what happened. And he's working in restaurants now? Because in their mind, I was a server, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, they find out, it's like, well, you met these celebrities and you go to these parties and you eat. How do you just walk into restaurants and eat for free? Because it's a network and we all take care of each other. And most restaurant managers get tired of eating the food where they work, so we comp each other. So I used to, when I met my wife, she was amazing. Like, we would travel, we would go to Vegas, and we'd go to a restaurant, and the guy would, and I didn't know he was there because they're nomads, and it'd be a guy that used to work for me back in Chicago to comp my meal. It's like, how is this possible? Like, everywhere we go, you run into somebody right? So they just looked at it like, I was struggling to pay my bills or something. So there are lots of jobs where you can enjoy your career and be successful, but we don't know them. So, at C, we were like STEM, opportunity, critical thinking. We were going to focus on that. But when I joke about it, us being a victim of the woke culture, is that was the goal. It was about, I guess I keep saying 3, but as these years go on, about 5 years ago. So we're focusing on that. Culture started to shift. George Floyd dies, because there wasn't this big push of DEI, right? So now DEI is counter to everything we were trying to do. So now we created this new layer that was we were already going in the wrong direction. We were trying to go here. Things were going here. Now we're like this. So now you think we can walk into a room and say, let us explain why we think you should focus on STEM and creating economic and academic opportunities for kids so they can achieve, when people are talking about 1619 and CRT debate, what book should be in school. So now our intent was lost. So now I've been forced for the last 2.5 years to push back against the toxic cultural push and the wokeism and all that stuff first, so I can get back to creating the academic opportunities.
Wow. Okay. So just to make sure I'm hearing you right, like, your organization obviously focuses on pragmatic solutions, right? I mean, as far as getting kids into STEM or into other fields where they can actually make a lot of money, and that would actually solve a lot of the disparities that we see. But now that we have the DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusive.
It's like the LGBTQ. Every month they add a new letter. Now it's DEIB. B is for belonging.
For what? Belonging.
Which I thought would be inclusion.
Inclusion.
Yeah, okay. So DEIB, get it right.
Okay, my bad. DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Oh man, I'm gonna make fun of that so hard. Anyway, so since they've exploited George Floyd's death to insert this stuff into schools and also into the corporate world as well, which has made it even harder for you to actually give a solution that's actually going to help. Because I'm sorry, this DEI stuff is not going to help anybody.
Without a doubt. Think about it this way. If we walked in the door, let's just say we're not going to fight DEI. We're not going to fight the culture. We're just going to keep doing what we were built to do. Put our head down. Mm-hmm. Problem is, I walk into a school and say, we want to get your kids focused in STEM. They said, that's great. What are you doing now? Here's what we're doing. And so I'm in New York. And then they even open about this, which is why we can get into some conservative stuff too, because I know you beat up on them and I got a problem with some of the stuff they do. Like, if you look at me, I tell them, please stop using their lingo. I mean, you use their lingo, you're going to lose. Stop saying CRT. Stop saying all this other stuff. Just simply say, this is what they're doing. Are you okay with it, right? Because the CRT can get into a debate about the definition. I don't want to waste my time with that. So they're open about it. If you don't say CRT, they're open about it. So they're saying they're not teaching CRT yet. The New York Department of Education sent an email out. I'm also a public school parent, bragging about, now they may shift because, even though Adams is not that good, he did promote, bring in his own director of education, who's a little bit different than de Blasio's woman.
Okay. And
so he had just hired a new woman right before he left office. And this woman was super, super pushing the stuff. So the email was excitement, saying that starting in fall of 2023, we will start teaching culturally relevant English and math. So I want to focus on STEM while they're going to teach math in a culturally relevant way, which means all the culture and DEI means it needs to be infused. It's not a class. There's no math, English, science, reading, and then DEI class. The DEI needs to be woven in every class. So when you teach math, you need to teach it from a Chinese student's perspective. To be fair, they're not just saying black. So you need to teach it from a black perspective. You need to understand that blacks learn from the verbal tradition and oral tradition. So you can't necessarily write it down. Maybe you give the math student, the black students math verbally. Right, and maybe you write it in other ways, and maybe you need to bring in, when you do word problems, instead of saying Jack gave Jill money, you gave Tyrone gave Shaquisha money, right? Maybe that'll make it easier because they didn't understand it. Now, mind you, I go for the simple question. So, are you telling me maybe there is racism based into the system? I'm not going to argue that. But are you telling me that all the blacks with letters behind their name are remember do the right thing? Are you saying they're super? Because how did they learn the math without that stuff in school for them? And they were successful. Now, in order for us to be successful, you need to put that stuff in the math, right? So how can I walk in as, a member of C trying to advance STEM when their STEM is interwoven into DEIB? It's not possible. So I have to defeat the DEIB first.
And when the way you describe it, that sounds like a grift. Like it's like they're pushing this stuff because I know they're getting paid to push this stuff, Charles. I know they are. They have to be. Whoever these DEIB people are, these school districts have to be paying them.
Oh yeah, because they're bringing in consultants, right? They're using other people's curriculum. Yeah, they're bringing people in. They're making coin. Mm-hmm. Yep, and it's all to help the kids.
Yeah, and then meanwhile, you still have black kids graduating high school not being able to read at the requisite level and do math at the requisite level. This is not going to solve that problem. And honestly, like I know we should try to attribute this stuff more to incompetence than malice. At a certain point, though, it's hard for me to do that. It's like, how do you not know what you're doing? Like, maybe a lot of them actually are true believers, but some of these people know that this is BS. They have to.
I spoke at a Moms for Liberty event. I know I'm going to get attacked in Ohio. And surprisingly, to his credit, because I like when people who don't agree with me come to listen, because it's kind of hard to debate me, though. I'm a weird character. I'm not a Republican. I don't talk about politics at all unless somebody else bring it up. So how can you say I'm being political? In fact, in my speech, I said, don't make it political. Don't bring up political parties, because plenty of Democrat parents don't want their kids being told they're oppressed or oppressors. Right?
That's a good point. That's a great point.
The superintendent of the school district where I was speaking showed up to the speech, right? So he made a comment at the end, pulled him aside to talk to him. So he's talking about, of course, it was kind of antagonistic because some of the parents don't like him. I said, no, I'm glad you're here. I want to talk to you. I said, let me ask you a simple question, though. Did you disagree with anything I said? And he said, no. I said, okay, so here's the problem. And one of the parents said, well, why won't you allow him to speak in the school? I said, the problem is you say you allow the parents to speak, but you only bring one type of speaker to the school to speak. And so my simple question was like, so you have DEI in the school, right? He said, yes. And you spent $1 million on it. He said, yeah. So we asked, do you have evidence that it works? I'm not saying that it's harmful. I don't know. I haven't done the research, but can you prove that it's helpful? He said, no. I said, so why would you spend so much time and millions of dollars on something that you're not sure works? That just seems, from an administrative standpoint, a waste of resources and not the proper way to administer, right? You should vet stuff first. You should roll it in slowly. It's like everybody we're all the school administrators across the country were playing poker, and they had all these chips, and then they were playing wisely, looking at the cards. I raised you 50, and then George Floyd died, and they said all in.
Wow.
Don't care if it works. Let me just push the chip there. So now when you lose your hand, you have nothing to fight with. You bet it all. And what you're betting aren't chips. Those chips are real children, right? So I don't have a problem with you teaching racism. Like I'm on record. I told Nicole Hannah-Jones this. I don't want the 1619 Project banned, mostly because I'd lose that fight anyway. But I do want this book in every school that's teaching the 1619 Project, because there's a chapter on every essay. So read their essay, read my chapter, discuss, right?
Yes.
That's the way it should be approached. However, when you teach that slavery is so bad, whatever, facts, a lot of it's factual, That's not the problem. The problem is at the end of the lesson, and then you say, see, this is what whites did. All whites didn't do it. And therefore, you're white, 12-year-old Johnny. So what do you think your role is in this? And what do you need to do to make a correction for all of this? That is the problem, because Johnny doesn't need to do anything about John Calhoun.
Yep.
That is the problem. Or when you turn to my son and say, well, you're oppressed because you're on this side of this ledger. So there's a debt owed to you and the system is against you and you're not going to achieve unless Johnny, your classmate, does his part to fix your oppression. That is where the problem lies. Telling them about slavery, I don't care. Now, except for when you do it, because quick note, you'll find this interesting. You may not have heard this. My son's 6, New York City student. And I never talked about race, even though I've written books about it, because I wanted him to do the old school way. I wanted him me. I wanted him to have somebody call him a name one day and come home. I wanted, then we could have the conversation about it, because he's 6, too young.
Yeah.
Never talked about race. I never mentioned it. I would test him just to see what he'd say. Like, what's the difference between these kids? He was like, how can you tell them apart? That one likes Captain America and he likes Thor. Oblivious. They started teaching this in class. He came home one day, like blown away about color because they taught him about Rosa Parks and moving on the bus, whatever. And then the next day he said that he could be a slave.
Wow. Oh my God.
But they're helping, right? He needs to know these things. He needs to know that.
Like what is the benefit of that? I mean, and I think that with this whole debate, and the left is really dishonest about this part because nobody doesn't want this stuff taught. No. But there's a way to teach it in a way that is designed to make little Johnny feel like he's oppressed because he's black and that he could be a slave, and that now because of slavery and Jim Crow in 2022 or when he grows up, he's not going to be able to accomplish as much because of the color of his skin. And then little Willie, who's white, it's his fault. So, and I know that they're not saying specifically it is your fault, little white Willie, but there's ways that they can teach it in a way that is designed to engender that white guilt. I mean, I wrote an article about this recently for Red State. I said critical race theory really is about white guilt, and now they're introducing white guilt to white kids at a much younger age, and it's driving me nuts. So here's my question. I mean, whether we're talking about CRT or whether we're talking about gender identity, sexuality, I'm sure you're familiar with all that stuff that's going on. What are conservatives getting wrong on this? And then I'm talking specifically about the chattering class, people like you and I, people who are in the media, conservative politicians, leaders, influencers. What are we getting wrong on this whole debate?
First, like I always say, don't use their language. I mean, I get why Rufo did it. Rufo wrote a blurb for my book. No problem with Rufo. And I think this thing was so lost because I've been talking about it before everybody else did. And I said that you let it go too far. So to think that you're just going to fix it with one lane. So where you and I differ, you kind of beat up on that. Like, so I don't know if you notice, if you like really read my tweets, you'll laugh because I really, I joke about it though, but the tweets I delete way outweigh the tweets that I tweet. It's probably 10-1 because I'm like, does it, comport with my point? And my point is I disagree with, that's why I'm not a Republican. I disagree with them on a lot of stuff. But I despise the left so much I refuse to call them out on it. Not my place. I got Jeff Charles for that. I got Tony Johnson for that. I will never call them out. I also won't praise them. You won't find Trump praise on my tweets either.
No, you don't. I
just don't talk about them. Culture. I'm like a horse with blinder. Culture. Well, what do you think about Trump? I'll let somebody else talk about that. Aren't you going to defend him? There's people out there for that. Aren't you going to bash him? There's people out there for that.
Yeah.
But so same thing with this, the CRT debate. It with Lindsay and Rufo, that stuff wins because there's a lot of people who are on the right who don't know what's going on. So you need to fire up a base because the left fires up a base. So I don't mind the people firing up the base. Yeah. But when it comes to brass tacks, I talked to a couple of people that commented, what do you want to do? I said, I don't pay attention to the laws because they're not going to fix anything. Now go ahead and try it if you want to. You'll get some incremental things, but you keep forgetting how pragmatic and crazy, but they're methodical about their moves. The left is. So they'll just find, instantly what happened? They passed a law and then they were posting videos of how they were going to find ways around the law. It's going to happen, right? It's right? It's like the criminals and the police ebbing and flowing about, well, we got this new law and this is how we're going to crack down. Oh, okay. So you're going to crack down on drug trafficking over this, and this. Okay, cool. But I heard the state's attorney say that to reduce crime and the difference between blacks and incarceration rates, you're not going to prosecute teens. Okay, so we're going to start recruiting teens and forcing them to carry out package it for us, and then you're not going to lock them up. So I'm never going to carry. So how are you going to lock me up? Whoop, balls in your court, right? So it's the same type of thing. So you can make those arguments. I'm not telling you not to do it, but I don't expect any big wins out of it. So the first thing is resting on your laurels, thinking you're going to beat this through legislation. It's not going to happen, right? Secondly, using their language. So I don't say, do what you want to do. But if you ask me for my advice, I say, don't go to the school and say, you need to get CRT out of school, because then you're going to have an hour of what is that? What you say is, because I say this because most of my liberal friends, like conservatives, will say, people will ask black conservatives, are you attacked by your friends and family? I don't get those problems because, one, I'm not a Republican, and because I don't get into the policy thing. I ask simple questions.
Yeah.
I say, do you think that slavery should be taught? They'll say yes. Okay, I'm cool with that. Do you think it should be taught differently for different ages? Yes. Okay, there's a problem with the way they're doing it. Let me show you. Or I'll say, do you think that you should tell a 12-year-old white kid this or a 12-year-old black kid this? Most of them will say no.
They'll say no.
Show you examples of where they're doing this. But then I just say real simple, do you think this is bad? So I give them actual examples of what's happening. And do you think this is bad? Most of them, even my liberal friends, white or black, would say, yes, that's bad. Because I don't say CRT as an umbrella, right? So that's the first thing. You need to get into specifics, and you need to know your argument. So you need to have enough examples, because they'll say stuff like, yeah, but that's a one-off. Yeah, but that only happened in Virginia. Yeah, but so you need to just, unfortunately, you need to pound them, which also means, here's another key thing that's hard for people. You need to walk away from the people you can't convince, because it's a waste of your energy and time.
Yeah.
Right, I know. Only if you ever see me,
I learned that the hard way.
If you ever see me debating a leftist, it's because I'm not convinced if they're a liberal or a leftist yet, and I'm trying to figure it out. Once I figure it out, my response is always, okay. And then I move on, and then they're still talking to me. I'm like, I'm done. I'm never going to convince you. You're not going to convince me. I have the 200, I call it, that I have to address. That's the 200 million people in America who aren't paying attention. They're not on the left. They're not on the right. They're keeping up with the Kardashians. They're minding their own business. How do I reach them? Because that's what you need to do. If you want to win this, you need people like I use my brother as an example. He is totally against this wokeness. He just doesn't know it exists. His kids are grown. And he doesn't watch the news, left or right, none of it. So when I tell him this stuff, he's like, what? And I send him this stuff. He's like, that's madness, right? So one, you got to get him to understand it's happening. But the harder part, that's easy. The harder part is to get him to understand that it's a problem for him, even because his first response was, whoo, I'm glad my kids are.
Yeah, dodge that bullet.
Right. So how do we get people like him, grandparents alike, to understand that this is a problem for them? So I paint a picture. These kids are going to grow up. They're going to go to college. They're going to become lawyers, right? They're going to be woke. They're going to be judges. They're going to produce television shows. They're going to be politicians. So they're going to dictate your policy. My brother's a gun nut. They're going to be more inclined to take your gun. They're going to be more inclined to raise your taxes. They're going to be more inclined to create movies, more movies about slavery, more movies showing your black grandkids as being oppressed, which will in turn make white liberals believe that they're oppressed, because look at all the movies. I watched this movie, and it's going to create this cycle, right? They're the reasons why white people, black conservatives and liberals, think that you hear it but they say it differently, but both sides will say, I just fell into the trap of saying both sides. Shame, no both sides. There's more than two sides. But you will get all types of white people saying, believe in generalizations about blacks. They just have different steps they want to take with the generalizations, but they still believe that we're all uneducated, we're all struggling, we're all shooting people, we're all murderers. You and I have engaged with other people saying, some white conservatives saying, yeah, but they commit 50% of the murders, right? Yes, but what percentage of blacks are there? They're like 6 black people. They're less than 50% of black people. So it's low. It's really low for whites, but it's also low for blacks. So quit acting like, yes, 50% of the murders are committed by 1.5% of blacks. So stop acting like blacks are committing the murders.
Yeah.
It's a very small percentage. So you're buying into the fact that, because if I believed you, I would think blacks are more likely to be violent. There's something genetically wrong with them, which is
exactly
not true. So If you allow this stuff in the school, these kids are going to grow up with a whole different worldview. There are two opposing worldviews. Forget about politics. Culturally, there is the, somebody is to blame for my situation worldview. There is a, human nature is human nature. We need to fight against what's bad, but we need to control what we can control worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you want making decisions? There is the, we can assign good and bad like some dictator on high, or, the individual is important. Two different worldviews. Which one's more important? And so most moderately center left, center right people will say, I have problems with both, but I will side with this one. But they're quiet while this one is wreaking havoc and gaining power. So how do we get them to speak out? That's what that needs to be in your mind every time you take a step.
That's true. And there's a lot there. I mean, especially going back to what you said about using the terminology, which I struggle with because I have to write about this stuff.
Yeah, we all fall into it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody uses that term. And even earlier on in the debate, I was trying to avoid it as much as I could because realistically, whether it's critical race theory, and I do say this, I'll say, I don't care whether you call it critical race theory. I don't care if you call it yellow banana strawberry pudding. It's bad. It's problematic. So I'll talk about problematic ideas on race or whatever introduced to kids. But at times, I mean, it's hard to not use the term because that's just how people will recognize it. Right. So but I do agree that we would be better off if we didn't hone in so much on the nomenclature and focus more on what's actually happening in these classrooms. And you're right about the whole examples thing. I've actually been making sure that I write an article on each story that I come across. That way I do have these examples because they do want to say that it's not happening. It's not true. I mean, they haven't done any studies on it, but there are just far too many news stories. I mean, they come out every single week. I get people emailing me stuff or DMing me stuff that's happening all across the country, not just in Virginia. It's happening. So,
and that's something else people can do. They can send it to people like you and me and other groups and let them know what happened, because then we can collect all this stuff and just like cards, just keep flicking them out. Well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I try not to use, not so much, I had to a little bit in my last book, but in We Want Equality, I think there's like 220 sources and only one of them is from a conservative site. It's harder work, but I use their sources because when I go to liberals, I don't want them to say, yeah, but that's Tucker.
That's Breitbart.
Yeah, but that's right wing. No, it's Washington Post, it's Think Progress, it's all of their papers of record. That's what I use. Or it's the direct source. So it's the school board, right? It's whatever I can do. That's important. And lastly, I say we should lead. The race thing is hard to fight. We should lead with the gender thing, because I'm finding when I mention that to people, regardless of their views, they're like, okay, that's where I draw the line. So lead with that. Do you want your 8-year-old being taught about gender identity? Whether you want to taught, because I know few people, most of my people don't want to taught at all, but I know a few people that's okay with it being taught, but they're like, yeah, why can't it be taught in high school? But they're not. They're teaching it to 7-year-olds. Yes. Right. And then they're like, well, no, that's inappropriate.
Yeah, okay. Nobody agrees with this stuff. And you are absolutely right about that, because even when the critical race theory stuff was going on, I started finding out more about the sexual orientation and gender stuff. And I even wrote an article saying this issue is going to become even more controversial and it's going to get more attention than even critical race theory, because it's a lot more egregious. And sure enough, that happened. And I actually just spoke with a teacher here in Florida. She's a friend of mine. And she was saying, when they passed like the Stop Woke Act, or even in other states where they passed their anti-CRT laws, teachers aren't worried about it, because you're right, they can find ways around it.
Right.
But with the parental rights and education bill, they're freaking out about that, because there aren't really a whole lot of ways around that. And so that is more of an issue, because more people agree with that. I mean, even Democrats agree that they shouldn't be teaching this stuff to little kids. So I agree, we should be leading more with the gender and sexuality stuff, and then also weaving in the race issues as well.
Right. Yeah.
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 So I want to talk about your book, Race Crazy. Now, I confess, I bought the book, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet. So that's my confession. I'm going to get to it, I promise. I know. So tell us about the book. What's it about?
Well, the book started Race Crazy is really simple. They've gone race crazy. Everything was about race. And like we've been talking for the last hour, there are no solutions, there are no benefits from it. It's all negative, but it doesn't matter. It feels good. And so I wanted to talk about that and how they're taking us down a dangerous path. Like I said, what I call it is the progressive racism movement, and it's basically kind of gentler John Calhoun. But as I went into it, so when I got the contract to write the book, they were like, all right, we're thinking of this as kind of like, shout out to Mary Graybar, the debunking Howard Zinn. It's going to be debunking the 1619 Project, right?
Okay.
And the BLM movement. So I go in and I'm looking up some stuff. The 1619 Project was easy, but I'm looking at BLM and I'm like, I'm freaking out. I'm all nervous. I'm like, this is going to be hard to debunk. So I called my publisher. And he's like, why? I'm like, because they don't say anything. So I wanted to be fair. I wanted to use their words against them, right? But I'm like, their site is like vanilla. It doesn't say anything. Hey, we care. Donate, right? And then so he's like, well, keep looking for some stuff. And then it was really small. And so there's 3 sections in the book. There's BLM. Most of it people know, but I go in depth and I kind of peel apart layers and I use my unique approach. Then there's the second part, which is the movement for Black Lives, which kind of blew my mind. It'll blow your mind when you see that. And people shockingly still don't talk about it. And then the 1619 Project. So the movement for Black Lives, what happened is I'm looking for BLM. I'm trying to find this stuff, little stuff. I'm taking notes, seeing the people. We've seen the Hawk Newsome and the girl in Chicago, all that stuff, but not enough. I want to know what they truly believe out of their own mouths, right? And I'm not finding anything. So I find this article on like the Washington Examiner about BLM getting, I don't know, $100 million. So I'm reading the article, but in the article, that's the headline, but in the article, it didn't say anything about BLM. It kept saying stuff about the Black something foundation. Black
Lives Matter global.
No, this was something different. Some other group.
Okay.
And I'm like, what is this? So I go down this rabbit hole and I'm finding all this stuff. And I found out the money is being held by this other group who's managing this other group, but really it's being managed by the Movement for Black Lives. And I'm like, what is this? So I go on this website, and it was like, you see those movies, the newer dystopian movies with the tech influence in it, and you click this little thing, and all this stuff starts to open.
Yeah.
They have a preamble, like a constitution. They have acts that they have, like 50 acts that they have ready to present to a caucus when it gets left enough in Congress. They have all these demands, all this stuff. Never heard. So I started to Google them. There were no articles written about them. Nobody had ever covered them. I'm like, how is this possible? So the second part of the book is all about them, about what they really believe. So basically, the Movement for Black Lives is an organization that's a collective of 170 other Black-led groups, and they kind of give them, counsel, advice. They write papers for them. So they're the brain trust, right?
Okay.
And so I explain who they are, and I kind of break down everything that they believe. So you remember a year and a half ago, people were debating what defund the policeman. Yeah. So on the left, they were like, well, it doesn't really mean take money. It just means to reallocate. And the right was like, no, they want to defund. And I'm like, here's what they say in their own work. It's baby steps. What they actually want is to abolish the police. And later on, people were talking about that, but it came directly from their own words. They have an old thing. This is what they have 3 points. What we are, who we are. We are abolitionists. And they lay out. So I just take big chunks of their own words, lay it out, and then I talk about back and forth about what it means, define it, what I believe, and even if you don't agree with me and you agree with them, what the ramifications are. So I'm using their own words, and I'm giving them their argument. I say, okay, police in the schools are bad. But you also say, when you read it, you'll find that they say their words, abolish the police, abolish all detention centers, all prisons, including ICE detention centers.
Oh, yeah. They definitely want to get rid of ICE.
No police in school, but you can't arrest anyone under 23 because their brains aren't fully developed. So no one under 23 can be arrested. There are no prisons. There are no police to arrest them anyway. No surveillance because they're against surveillance. Add all this up. No security, no detectors to walk through in the school. How do you protect the kids in school? No one asked that question. I would say, okay, that's why I say they're emotionally weak and intellectually lazy. So give them their argument. No police, no prisons, no one under 23 can be arrested. No surveillance, no metal detectors, and no safety officers in the school. But there are weapons in school, and there's drug sales in school, and there's violence in school, and you on the left says they're bullying. So how do we combat that?
Yeah, exactly.
We also don't want the kids exposed because that's expulsion is racism. So even if you give them their argument, they're making the schools more dangerous. It's that type of thing. They talk about fairness for immigrants, and they talk about open borders. They openly say open borders, and who are we to pick who gets to come in? So I lay that out to say my point is my audience isn't really conservative. It's to conservatives to say you need to learn how to speak better so people can hear you, so you don't sound like some racist whatever. But really, I'm saying liberal people who aren't crazy left. I get that you care about this stuff and you opened up your wallets because some guy died. I don't care. But at the same time, you're opening up your wallet. We know this now because it's been 2 years later and we've written all these articles about BLM and the houses. But 2 years ago, I'm saying you're opening up your wallets to people who are openly antagonistic to your whole premise, meaning they're against capitalism. We are abolitionists. The second was we are anti-capitalist. So now I get that you want to end police brutality. Okay. But you're giving your money to people who don't think you should exist as an entity. They are for government control of gym shoes. You morons. Why would you give money to someone who wants you out of business? So I just lay that out and say, where do you go from here? My goal was simple. My goal was not to create Republicans because I'm not one. My number one goal was to educate people. The number two goal was, if you're not going to do anything else, stop giving these people your money.
Yeah.
Don't do it. And this is what happened. And then lastly, it was 1619. It was basically, it's so bad and toxic and full of lies of omission. Like I said, I wrote a chapter for every essay because she didn't have a book at the time. And it was like, here's an essay on capitalism. Here's my chapter on that essay where I pick apart every source, every argument they make, and then I fill in the gaps. And I'm open. I say it's well written. I say it's 70 to 80% factual. But here's the problem. What they leave out. They say the founders were slave owners. I think if you're going to be honest, don't you need to admit that 20 some odd % of them weren't slave owners?
Yeah.
Don't you need to mention that Benjamin Franklin owned slaves at the beginning, but he became an abolitionist? They don't even mention abolitionists. They write a large part about the Reconstruction era, and they don't mention Ulysses S. Grant, 2-term president. His whole presidency fell in Reconstruction. But you know who they do mention? Rutherford B. Hayes. Because they wanted to fit in the 1876 election that was close, where he lost the popular vote, and he needed to do some horse jockeying to win. And what he traded was he offered to pull the federal troops from the South, which obviously was a bad step, and it ushered in Jim Crow. Totally factual, but that got a stake. But nothing that Ulysses S. Grant did. None of the Civil Rights Act of 1871 or 1866, none of that is mentioned in the 1619 project. You think that none of these educated people knew this stuff when they were doing research?
Yeah, of course they did.
Of course they knew it. They intentionally left it out, right? They say things like American capitalism, like there's flavors of capitalism, right? They say stuff like, anti-black racism because America was founded on the whole premise of saying 1619 is saying because that's the year the first African slaves arrived, but it's not true because African slaves were in what is the current United States today in Georgia and Florida in the 1500s. Why isn't it the 1530 project?
Right.
And they were brought by Europeans. You know why they didn't include it? Because they weren't brought by the Europeans that founded America, right? In Plymouth. They were brought by Spanish European. Spain is in Europe, but we don't want to count them because they didn't start America. We're trying to tie it to George Washington. So
they're targeting America. Yeah.
We're cherry picking. So I lay that out. I mean, I take a scalpel to the whole 1619 project.
Good. That makes me more excited about reading it. What's the reception been to your book?
Most of it's been mostly positive. I think that I figured I tried to you know her, so it's hard to do that dance. I tried to engage Nicole Hannah Jones and her acolytes enough to be like an honest conversation, but without where it doesn't become an argument where you don't get blocked, because she'll just yell something at you and block you. So you had to do slow steps. So she's tweeted at me a couple times, called me in the 1776 Unites group mediocre, but she hasn't blocked me. She did say I haven't read it, which is interesting because I read every essay like 5 times. But she said,
well, if you're going to write about the essay, you have to read it.
Right. So I called her out about the abolitionists. She's like, well, clearly you haven't read it. I'm like, you said the word 3 times. You never admitted any, even herself, when she wrote the new book that came out, she said she made some corrections and she admitted that she should have said some whites instead of all whites. So you're admitting what I wrote, but you're saying I never wrote it when I called it out. So it's stuff like that. But most of the reception has been good. I'm not a big name. You joked about me, me being a celebrity, but I'm not a big name. So it's harder because, I also have a day job. So I sell books whenever I do media. So I go on Jesse Kelly, I go on Kill Meat, I sell, a good chunk of books. And then it's slow after that, right? But the biggest thing is when I speak. So I mentioned Moms for America. I go out and speak at these events. And so usually they'll buy a bunch of books and they give them to people. So that's how the word is really getting out. So the key would be for people to buy the book, like buy a case, or organizations like, the Heritage Foundation to buy 4 or 5 cases and to pass them out. My goal is to get it in every school that is teaching the 1619 Project. I think when it launched, it was in 3,000 schools. You have to assume after George Floyd, it's got to be, let's say conservatively, 10,000 schools. So there should be 10,000 of these books in each one of those schools. Just one book in each school so they can say, use it as a resource. That's the first goal. And then to have other people who are pushing back against this stuff use it. And the other one, because I lay out ways that you can put, because it's a chapter, because the last essay is by a woman that says, why can't we teach this? So my essay is why it can't be taught. So I lay out why you can't teach it. And I said, because it's lies of omission, because you don't admit this, because you don't talk about Black excellence, because you want to teach about the truth about Blacks, but there's nothing positive in it. Right. So where is all of that? So teach the slavery, but can I get, there's also really quickly, no positives from Reconstruction, no abolitionists, no Booker T in the whole essay at all. There's no Black Renaissance. There's no uplift of Blacks. There's no, celebration of Black politicians, celebrities, business owners, none of that.
Yeah, the accomplishments and the excellence.
There are no accomplishments.
You never want to talk about that.
And lastly, there's no solution. So if I give them their argument, everything they say is right, they didn't omit anything, whites are bad, America's bad, go, what do we do? They don't offer anything. There's nothing. It's like, go away mad, children, go away mad. Mm-hmm. So if for nothing else, you don't teach it because you leaving me hanging, right? It's a cliffhanger and the next season never starts. I end the season waiting for the new season where I'm going to find out what happened. And
they cancel the show.
So they just end the show like that.
Yeah.
You need to tie it up. I'm excited. I'm angry. I'm an activist. You made an activist. What are my marching orders? There are none.
Yeah. And on that uplifting note, no, I mean, there's so much more to this. So, I mean, I'm sure as this debate goes on, we'll have to keep talking about this again. But I'm running out a little bit out of time. But before we go, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
I guess the easiest is Twitter at CDouglasLove3, and the website is thecharleslove.com.
Okay.
You can find the books. You can find articles when I upload them because I'm busy.
Yeah.
Clips from shows. The Cut the Bull podcast.
Yes,
you should come on.
Hey, I'm there whenever you're ready.
Shamika Michelle and Wilford Riley. We have some pretty good guests there. I also do a radio show on AM 560 The Answer. It's the Salem station in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So radio, seeking educational excellence, speaking, podcast, day job, sleep after we fix the wokeness. So I'll worry about that later. So
there you go. And being a bona fide celebrity.
And buy the book. Buy the book.
Yes, I'll put the link to it in the show notes.
Yeah.
To both of them. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. We got to do it again sometime soon.
Looking forward to it. It's fun.